Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about academic libraries in a digital age. I think it's a really interesting topic because so much is changing right now. We're still in the midst of a multi-decade transition from the analog world to the digital world. Academic libraries are still buying lots of physical books, but of course, we have so many digital resources as well, from e-journals to e-books to databases and all kinds of new materials that scholars and students need to use from the library. So when I think about that new realm, there are a number of factors that I think we need to account for and ways of addressing those factors and that constant change. The first thing that I always like to talk about when I think about academic libraries in a digital age is that they really need to be incredibly flexible. They need to be able to serve different audiences and different purposes with the same resources. And so it's a world in which we're stretched incredibly thin because you do need to do a lot with very little. The library budgets are not expanding, but the kinds of things that libraries need to do is in fact expanding. A lot of that is because there are entirely new fields that did not exist a decade or two ago. A lot of these fields, I think rather interestingly, cross disciplines. They're interdisciplinary. So we have disciplines. In fact, there's one right behind me, digital history, which really takes elements from computer science and from traditional historical practice and tries to put them together to see what new knowledge might emerge from new techniques. And so I think for the library to serve that kind of a new discipline, a new discipline, again, that crosses boundaries, it does indeed need to be very flexible. Needs to be able to, for instance, handle and serve up entirely new forms of information. In the case of digital history, that means we have large-scale digital archives. We may have data sets that are at a scale that is very large and that needs to be able to be scanned through. So the library is constantly having to assess the needs of scholars and students and to make those resources available, whether they're digital or analog. The second thing that I would say is that there's a real need for discovery systems. So there's so much information right now that libraries are storing or providing access to that it's often very hard for the researcher to, in fact, find what she needs. If you just look at science, for instance, there are so many science journals, science data sets. The production out of the realm of science is so enormous now that it's really difficult for an individual to stay on top of it. And I see the library as being essential to providing a way to handle that much information in a way that it's always done. It's always been good at cataloging and providing discovery systems for information at scale, and it needs to do that now with new digital resources. The scholar really simply can't track the amount of information that is coming out in her field. So new discovery systems are important. Related to that is also an element that I often talk about, which is the importance of serendipity. One of the great things about physical libraries is that you physically encounter shelves and books. You're in your line of sight. You walk into a library, and as you scan the shelves, you might encounter a book that you weren't thinking about ahead of time, or maybe didn't know existed, but that might pique your interest. And so we need to be able to bring that notion of serendipity and serendipitous discovery into a digital age, and that's incredibly difficult. At the Digital Public Library of America, we have 15 million items from over 2,000 libraries, archives, and museums that have digitized their content and provided it to us in our network. That's a huge volume, and so we have to do a lot of thinking about how we replicate that serendipity of the shelf. What are the browsing systems that we provide online so that the researcher might encounter something that would spark a new idea or that would complete their research in a way that's helpful. So discovery and serendipity, I think, is very important. Finally, one thing that I'll point out is that we really overall need to think in terms of verbs rather than nouns. You need to think about the library as providing active services rather than passive items, not things on shelves, although we still have those, whether they're digital shelves or physical shelves. Um, we certainly have items stored in a kind of inert way, but we need to become much more active. And I think a lot of the factors that I just talked about of providing those new kinds of services are really about being active and being about verbs rather than nouns, activities rather than things. I think if you get into that orientation, if you're in an academic library, you will in fact start to think of new services that can in fact reach out to the scholarly community, to the educational community, and provide new ways for them to use the library, to value the library, and indeed to move forward together into new forms of research. One other area that's very important for academic libraries to take account of at this point is also the fact that they are in fact networked together with other academic libraries and indeed other institutions across the world. There was a time not so long ago where an academic library would try to contain as much material within its own walls as it could to serve its community. Now, of course, with digital networks, digital media, and technology, they are in fact connected with many other institutions, just as DPLA is connected with thousands of institutions across the United States. And what that means is that you have an opportunity to not, in fact, hold everything right within your walls or on the hard drives or computers or servers on your campus, but in fact to access material that's remote. That's a very powerful transition. It has a lot of implications for collection development and the way we provide the services that I was just talking about. And it means that you can, in fact, create what I've called synthetic collections, collections that are united across campuses. For instance, I'm talking to you from Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. And within Massachusetts, there are a number of institutions that hold archival materials related to the poet Emily Dickinson. Recently, those materials have been synthesized together for the first time into a full collection of her archival materials, her manuscripts, her original writing. And so institutions like Harvard University and Amherst College that had collections that were physically separate, once they digitized those and networked them together, and now these are all in the DPLA, they created for the first time an entire collection of all of her works. And I think that that opportunity of thinking about what the networked library can do, that notion of libraries working together is incredibly powerful and it again allows for us to think about entirely new services.